Okay, it's 9 a.m. here in California. We open our event and we open also the lines for our attendees to start joining us. We'll take another minute or two to make sure that people can join. And I see people slowly joining our event, our discussion, this upcoming seminar on ISO 27, sorry. Hold on, let's see. See some people in the meeting room, in the waiting room. We will give it another few seconds to make sure that our attendees joining us. And while we are waiting for them, I would like to welcome our speakers that are joining us from Israel, and also welcome our speakers here in California. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today and join us for this seminar. This is very exciting. It's another educational seminar from the California-Israel Chamber of Commerce for the benefits of our network, to learn something that is really important for them to have. Before we start our session today, I'd like to remind our attendees that this session is being recorded. It's also being broadcast live on Facebook, so welcome if you are on Facebook, and thank you if you are here with us on this webinar. Before we start the session, I also want to remind everyone that don't hesitate and ask us questions during the webinar. Don't wait until the end. It's okay, just use the chat box either on Facebook or on the webinar platform that we're using on Zoom. Just type in your question or raise your hand and we will monitor those questions and ask our panel speakers to comment on your questions. Okay, so while people are still joining us, I want to welcome our speakers. I'll start with Yulia Yamrom. This is Women's Week or Women's Month. So we'll start with Yulia. Hi, Yulia, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Great. So for those who don't know, Yulia, for the past 10 years, is the COO of Ronet International Certification Services Ltd, which means that Yulia has already over 10 years of experience in managing audit programs and certification processes. Yulia is also a program manager for information security certification schemes. She is the lead auditor for various ISO standards, including ISMS and PIMS, and she is also an accreditation process manager and much, much more. Great to have you, Yulia, with us today.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored.
Great. Go ahead.
A little bit about myself. Well, everything that you said basically means that what I'm doing in Ronet is managing all that has everything that has to do with auditing, starting from the getting accredited, which means that the certificate that we provide to our customers is recognized all over the world, and to having auditors trained and being competent enough in every technical area so we can provide the best professional services we can to our customers.
Great, thank you. So I'm going according to the speakers on my screen, and I'm moving to Hanan. Hi, Hanan, good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me, Sharon.
So Hanan Schwartzbord, for those who don't know, is the CISO of Marvell Semiconductors. And really, like many of you, he started his career in IT. He spent 12 years with PMC Sierra, which is now Microsemi. He also spent 3.5 years in Sapiens as the CIO. and then moved to Marvell, who in return pulled him from Israel to Silicon Valley. Between us, Hanan is one of those IT guys who matured into the CISO role, and we will hear more about it later on today. So that means he holds a unique perspective, bringing the ins and outs of IT and its challenges and dissonance between the IT and CISO. Great to have you with us, Hanan.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward for this discussion.
Anything I forgot to tell about you and your experience?
No, I think I've been, like you said, I've been doing IT for many years. Roles, I started as technical lead and moved into management. Later on in my career, decided to move into security. Found it more interesting and more challenging these days. I've been doing a semiconductor and also worked in software companies. I think discussion is really interesting because I think it's something that we should be discussing, looking on the supply chain and the risks that around that. So looking forward for the discussion today.
Great, thank you so much for spending the time with us. Moving forward to Noam Morginstin. Hi, Noam. Good afternoon.
Hello.
You're in Israel.
Yes, good morning and good afternoon, wherever you are.
So for those who don't know, Noam is a seasoned executive leader. He has been driven by the vision to end the days of stressful, out of control, critical incidents, right, Noam? So I heard that this is why you actually founded Exigence, right? For those who don't know, Exigence has a unique platform for putting IT operation and also cybersecurity leaders back in control of the incidents that impact their business. Great to have you, Noam. What can you tell us about yourself?
Thank you very much. So yeah, our tool is used for responding to security incidents, but that's not the reason I'm here. We're operating in a space, we're a small company operating in a space that is very demanding from the security perspective. And that's why we found ourselves needing to improve our security standards and to be able to show it. So, that's why I'm here today, because we did the ISO 27001. But we'll talk about that later. So thank you very much for having me over.
Okay, well, last but not least is our moderator for today, Ben-Aderet. Hi, Ben. Good to have you. See you again. How are you today?
Hi, good. Thank you. Good to be here.
Great. So Ben is known to be a visionary entrepreneur, and he's very innovative, and he is the founder of GRSee Consulting. He has more than 20 years of extensive experience in the InfoSec space. He is a leader of many activities, and he is going to take charge from now on this conversation. Ben, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Sharon, for having me again, and thank you for all my colleagues to join in here. So, when we put this together, we actually wanted to provide a few perspectives around ISO 27001. So what we did, we wanted to have the point of view of a large corporate, and the representative for that is Hanan. And we wanted to have another perspective from the startups, which is the representative for this is Noam, obviously, and we have Yulia as the lead auditor here, representing Ronet, and I'm, as Sharon mentioned, I've been in the cybersecurity and compliance space for a bit more than 21 years now, and I've been the founder of GRSee Consulting for the past 12 years. So I've been around compliance a lot. And really, I think in order to get this going, maybe Yulia, we can start with you, and maybe just walk us through, could you provide like a dumbed down version of what it is actually ISO 27001?
Sure. Well, we're basically starting to talk about standards, and any of you who have ever encountered in certification, starting from quality, whether it's environment, whether it's health and safety, here we are dealing with information security, but it's still all about standards. The standards, they reflect requirements, but the requirements tell us what is expected from the organization when they're managing the management system. The how is something that the organization needs to develop. And this is the whole point. We as auditors, we're looking to see what is the reality of the organization, because when we come and audit Noam, we would not expect the same security controls that Hanan has and the other way around. Their needs are different and the requirements could be interpreted in different ways. So as auditors, our challenge is just to approach the organization to see how they have defined the information that they need to protect. Basically, what is it? Either whether it's something that is required to be protected by the law, or this is something that they need to protect from their business point of view, or this is something their customers require them to do as a part of their contract. Whatever the reason it is, first of all, the organization needs to identify what information they need to protect. They need to think, who are they going to use to protect this information? People who need to be competent to manage this, tools and technologies, and training and awareness. They need to bring their people forward and to make them committed to whatever the organization has defined as a part of their information security. They need to think about risks. What are the risks to the information? Where can they be attacked? And their information could be stolen or maybe adjusted or amended in a way they don't want it to happen. Mm-hmm. And after they consider the risk, all they need to do is to implement whatever controls they decided that they need to have, and then just to see if it's effective with various kinds of processes, such as internal audit, document review, which means, management review, which means they're looking at their processes, seeing if whatever they did is effective, and if not, they improve it. That's basically, I think, in a couple of words, what we're looking for.
Okay, and thank you for that quick brief. And you've spoken a bit about like how the ISO is set up and structured and about the ISMS, but I wanted to ask a question here. Maybe we'll start with Hanan. Can you share, like, what was actually the main driver for compliance for you in your organization, specifically around ISO 27001?
The way I looked at ISO when we started the process was part of our maturity roadmap and where we want to be going forward. Putting the standards, putting the controls, putting the processes in place, making sure that one model, as we like calling it, we have one standard and the whole company follows the same standard. Getting audited, I don't see that as a bad thing. I see that as a really positive thing, and this allows me to make sure that my governance and my plan has been deployed globally, and to make sure that we all adhere to these processes. And I think it's really important to go through the maturity process. Now, the second thing is I require my vendor to have at least the ISO standard, depending on the requirements and what they're actually doing with Marvell. And it's really important for me to understand the requirements and the processes they go through. ISO is a good example, and obviously we're also looking at NIST and SOC and others. And it's really important that we know this actually entails and what's the process they have to go through. I think the last thing, again, going back to the supply chain security and privacy and the relationship between those and some of the locations that we're at, it makes it much easier for me to understand my current status worldwide, and making sure that we meet the privacy requirements, we meet the supply chain requirements for our customers as well. And I can have one view of my environment and making sure that our environment meets those requirements in one shot, so to speak.
Okay, so in other words, would you say that setting up the ISMS and getting your ISO 27001 certificate initially, in essence, helped you in building up your compliance program and just ensuring that you work in accordance to an international standard?
Yes, I think it did more than that. I think it helped me set my governance plan, not just my compliance plan. it wasn't just about getting the certificate, it was getting the processes in place. The certificate is the add bonus for that. And it was really important for me to make sure that my global teams follow the same processes, that we can present one clear message on what we consider as highest risk from Marvell. And that meets my 3-year strategy plan and my 5-year roadmap and all the rest of them. And they all, at the end of the day, have to align to the same process. I think there's also a lot to say about Marvell as a manufacturing company having certificates showing that they consider cybersecurity as risk and important, and they are looking to align to international standards, as you said. So there are a lot of motivations, in my view, to go through an ISO process.
Okay, and with having that answer in mind, I wanted to ask a similar question. I wanted to address a similar question for Noam, because you obviously represent a whole different type of entity. So what was the main driver or the main reason that you decided to pursue compliance with the ISO 27001?
So we're a small software company, but we're holding information that is very critical and sensitive for our customers. You know, they're critical incidents, and and all our customers actually require us to bypass their security assessments. That, I mean, they do assessments to us. I know some of these assessments hold hundreds of questions. Now, one of these questions is always, do you have a third-party audit or certificate of your process? And we started by answering, well, not yet, but we're going to do this in the coming months. And at a certain point, it stopped working. So we had it was beginning of last year, the previous year, we had one customer requiring us in the agreement to have ISO 27001. By the way, another one asked for SOC 2 Type 2. So we decided to do both, and they actually work very well with each other. So for us, it started clearly as a business requirement, and but it evolved beyond that, and I guess we'll get to that later. But it started the business requirement, and today it's simply easier for us to even start discussions with potential customers. I even mentioned it today. Okay, so it always makes things much easier on the business side.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's interesting. Maybe you could elaborate on that. So actually, the fact that you have the ISO 27001 certificate and processes in place, that actually helps you in your sales cycle. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've mentioned customers putting in agreements. The one that asked for the ISO 27001 is a very large US company that every software company would like to have as a customer. They don't even let me use their logo, but yeah, but definitely that's a business enabler. That's for sure for us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and having said that, I mean, we still hear some objections around getting ISO 27001 ready or certified. And Yulia, maybe this one is for you. I wanted to ask you, in your experience, did you hear or maybe can you share about what are the major objections that you've heard from customers around that, around not complying with ISO?
Yeah, I think that mostly is I think the most common fear is that it's going to be very pricey and a very long and complicated process, basically a huge headache that will cost a lot of money and something that involves a lot of bureaucracy. And do we really need that? And probably we're getting some kind of auditor that is just only going to look for nonconformities and will never get certified. And this is something that we will not be able to deal with. And mostly people look at it as something that will take a long time, not very contributive to the organization, and will cost a lot of money. I always say, well, not having a system to protect your information will cost you more eventually. So look at that. But these are main objections that I think that, like Noam said, until you really have to do it, maybe you don't go into start to thinking about it, planning, using a consultancy that could help you you know, do like put some order into things to understand that it's not really a whole big of a mess. Or as Hanan said, you need to be mature to see that the system is going to be something that will contribute and help you manage your processes and your security as a system, and not as something that is happening right here, right now, and just a small project that when you're done with it, you forgot about it.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that some companies fear that this will be a lengthy project. And in your experience, and maybe Noam, you can chime in here as well. What's the typical turnaround on such a project for a smaller company, let's say like a startup company similar to Noam's?
I can judge from my point of view. First of all, we come into picture when the company is already prepared, using a consultancy organization that helps them to develop their policies and understand what kind of system they need to have. But since the beginning, they've decided that they want to have an audit. I think the whole process is really dependent on how prepared the organization is. It is document review stage. Within 2 weeks from that one, we can have a stage 1 audit to identify any gaps that might occur on stage 2 audit. Then we can have up to a week between those. I think that it could vary from a month and a half to 3 months.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Hanan, I wanted to ask you about, so you mentioned that, you use the ISO as, like it's part of your maturity and compliance program, but did you have any, like, what was your way to get leadership support for having the ISO? Was that even a challenge for you?
Yes, definitely, putting more restrictions and going through additional audits, and obviously there is a spend, and it needs to meet the company's portfolio. I think the challenge was more to explain why we need ISO. I don't believe in boiling the ocean. I think we need to take baby steps. We need to grow and mature, and this needs to work with the rest of our program. And I think it was really important that we align our compliance program to our IT operations program, to our privacy programs, to our supply chain security program. And once we did the alignment, it made a lot more sense to go through the process. And I think once we've been able to show the alignment, and we started our year 1 audit where we had our basic ISO certification, we had our basic processes in place. And as we continued growing, it just made it easier. Year 2 was much bigger. We started with, I would say, a few hundred people, and we grew it for the whole company in the time span of about 3 years. And it just made sense to do it that way. I think management was really interested in the process simply because they did see the additional value. It did take some time to get that value in place, but I think once our management saw that it could be used as a sales tool in some sort, it could help us with our own maturity and compliance, it made sense. I think I'm very proud of Marvell having the ISO certificate at this point in time.
Mm-hmm. And you did mention that you require your vendors to be ISO 27001 ready or compliant. Is that like part of your compliance program? I'm asking like to try to to enlighten our listeners to know what to expect when they try to get in the door and work with large American corporations. So what's typically expected? So you mentioned ISO, but you also mentioned SOC 2. Did you have like a specific checklist, or you're basically satisfied with if they adhere with like a single industry certification?
I think it really depends on what that vendor is going to be doing for Marvell and the relationship that we have with them. It depends if they're a SaaS vendor, if they're a IaaS vendor, if they're going to work with Marvell, if they're going to hold our PII, if they're going to support folks in the EU. So it really depends. I see a very close relationship between all of those. In our point of view, our NIST certification, our GDPR certification, all of those processes, or compliance, all of those processes are really related, and we look at our vendors the same way. It really depends on the relationship that we have with the vendor, and I think it's really important to see that connection between the different audits. I think if at this point in time in the US, if I would try to go through a CMMC audit or certificate without going through NIST 800-171 first, and trying to do that without going through ISO just to start the process, it's going to be really difficult. And it's really important to plan how you're going to achieve from one certificate to the other and see the connection between those.
So in other words, the ISO 27001 served as a jumping board, right? You can build on it for other certifications.
Yeah.
Okay. I actually had a question for Noam, but his Zoom is, just crashed, and I see we have a question from the crowd. So at what stage of setting up the company do we need to start taking care of certification? I mean, I would love to have all of our speakers' thoughts on that. I can, my personal opinion based on my experience in this space is that probably 6 to 12 months before you want to start closing deals with large enterprises, this is when you need to start having conversations with your consulting agency and with your auditors. Because it will probably take you, door to door. Will probably take you no less than 6 months, in my experience. But I mean, I'm happy to hear my colleagues here. Maybe Yulia, you could provide an answer to this.
I think that some of what Hanan mentioned regarding having the commitment of the people. It starts with the top management and it goes down to all employees and establishing system to work with the suppliers. I totally agree. The sooner the better, because the system needs to be well established, and you need to know how your processes work and whether they are effective, and to change along the way. So to start establishing writing policies and correcting them, this is something that takes time. So Ben said 12 months prior to having the certification and signing contracts. Whatever timeline it is, the sooner the better, because it takes time to build a system. It's not here is a kit of documents, use it and that's it. You have to take people in, you have to bring them forward, you have to have them with you, you have to have them understand why do they need to implement those processes and what kind of sensitive information they're exposed to, so they could really implement whatever you're asking them to implement. And in order for you to know what is required, it takes time to learn the system and to adjust it, to make a lot of fine tuning along the way.
Okay. Thank you, Yulia. I actually had a question for Noam. I'm not sure if
Yeah,
he's on.
my Zoom crashed. I can't get my camera to work, but if you hear me, so I'm going to try to fix that also. But
okay, yeah. We can hear you. So let me ask you a quick question. So you mentioned that the ISO has evolved beyond just having the certificate. Can you elaborate on that? Like, what are the additional benefits that you see Exigence now has due to as a result of having the ISO in place?
So yeah, so we started, merely for the business benefit of it, but as we implemented ISO, and I think the process, which took us, I believe, about 6 months, is also the process itself was very good and really got us to a higher level on a security, on a technical and I would say governance or procedural level. So if I would point out some very specific things, so I see ISO as having two major parts. One of them is the technical side. The other one is the whole way the company is run, and it doesn't really matter if you're small or big. So some of the things we really gained is improving our processes around onboarding employees and offboarding employees and training them. So, I think on one hand, and I hope that that's what Yulia thinks as well, because she's our auditor, but I think we came to this process very mature, but we've still gained a lot. Okay, so the whole issue of, how do you make sure that all the employees in the company are aligned and are operating properly to adhere with all these security measures that we wanted in place even before we started, but this really helped us achieve that. Making sure we have no gaps on the technical side, although we're very aware of that, and as a company even beforehand, but undergoing ISO made sure there are no gaps there as well. And in general, you think you're doing a good job, but until you bypass a test, you're not sure about that, and and you find things that you're not good as you thought you are. So just preparing and studying for the tests covers, you get 80% of what needs to be lined up, improved, and we've also learned from the audit process itself a lot. So I point out some specific things, but in general, it took us up a few steps on the procedural and technical level, and today it's not just being able to sign contracts, but it's also being able to undergo security assessments, which is also a sort of an audit, security assessment by customers. Today we're able to pass them much easier because we speak the right language, we have processes in place, technical controls are in place, and so on. So
okay, and I actually
it's not just business anymore. I mean,
okay, and I actually had a follow-up question about how you demonstrate return on investment on this. So, but I think it's evident from what you just said, right? So basically, in other words, you mentioned that it helps you. I mean, it helps you streamline the sales process, if I understand correctly, right?
Yeah,
So
it helps us streamline the process. It helps us undergo sometimes yearly assessments with some organizations, expanding our business, but going back to the basics, without that we could not sign at least half of our customers. Today it's a requirement. It's not something that we could even decide we don't need to do. It's a requirement. You have to have it, and you have to do it right.
And just a quick follow-up question on this, because our listeners might be interested in that. Without mentioning any names of customers, you mentioned this is a requirement by most customers. Would you say most of these customers are in the US or are in Europe?
Both. I saw US customers that usually say US customers are interested in SOC. I saw US customers asking about ISO and mandating that. And I spoke today with a European customer, and when he heard, we have ISO, they said, okay, fine. So that takes away a lot of the question, the potential customer.
Okay.
Both. Yeah.
Thank you. And I wanted to, I think we have a question from the crowd here. Okay, so this is a nice one. How should a company choose a vendor? Does it vary by company size, company type, or does one size fit all? I will let my colleagues answer this. I don't want to be biased. So Hanan, could you share, maybe share how it is, what was your way of choosing a vendor?
I think we do everything. We talk to our colleagues, we looked around. I think for us it was important to have a really strong vendor that would help us go through the process. We wanted, again, because we are looking at our compliance program as one program, we wanted to have a vendor that could help us go through ISO and NIST and other frameworks that we had in mind. So it was really important that we can go with one international strong vendor. We have a lot of sites worldwide, so it was really important to have that partnership globally and to have that visibility globally and that experience globally. Yeah, I think like every other vendor, you just have to go through the process.
Yeah. And we have another question by Nelly, who's also a SOC 2 auditor. This question is addressed for Yulia. What are the main problems the companies have when they start their stage 1 audit?
Well, I think that the main problems you encounter them in the document review stage, because before you come to the stage 1 audit, which is required to be on site, you would like to see that their required documentation has been developed, has been presented, it is satisfactory. They address the requirements at a minimum, but they do have whatever needs to be documented. And from what you've read, you understand that the company has a management system. You don't have an opinion about how good it is, but they have a management system and they have a documented management system. I can tell you that this is something that prevents having those awkward stage 1 audits when you arrive at site and they have nothing. And basically you feel very, very bad as an auditor saying, I'm sorry, but I have to terminate the audit because you're not ready. I don't want to waste your time and not having stage 2 audit and not continuing to certification because you're not going to get certified. I think that Ben was talking about vendors and Noam and Hanan were talking about their point of view of how to get started with the process. I can say that from my point of view, when it comes to consultants, I think you need to choose someone who helps you build a system and not provides you with the kit of procedures. You need someone who invests the time, and yes, it costs more money, but you need someone who does the gap analysis, and you need someone who does the development of the procedures along with the organization and not something that has a template that doesn't really address what you are doing. And you need someone who's there to do the risk assessment and who's there to do the internal audit and who's there to point all those weaknesses, because this process can give you an identification of weak spots that the external auditor will find and might prevent you from getting certified, or at least delay this process of certification. So from that point of view, the main problems could be unawareness if the company was not involved in the process. If the management is not there to give the resources or to be there, at least to be aware of risks. So I can tell you that yes, the most of the organizations that are having trouble, it's awareness, it's compliance, because legal department don't talk to any other department. It's the thing that the IT, it's their problem, the information security, not the whole organization. So these things can really be a big obstacle.
Mm-hmm. And maybe we can take a step back here, Yulia, because you mentioned stage 1. Maybe you could just provide, I'm familiar with the ISO, but we know we have stage 1 and then stage 2 and then the certification decision. Can you just in a few sentences, provide some clarity around that?
Yeah. So the document review, as I said, it's supposed to identify any gaps. The stage 1 audit, the purpose of the audit is first to verify the physical premises, to see that you are what you are and you are where you are and you do what you do. And to get an impression of physical security, to look at the scope that you requested and you had the proposal for the audit days according to that scope is the scope that is being certified, and there are no additional departments that you think that they are going to be in the scope, but they're actually not. Risk analysis. The purpose is to understand whether the risk analysis process is defined. We're not yet looking at the assessment itself, but we're looking at the process, how you identify your risks, how you classify them, what is the criteria, how do you develop your treatment plans? And of course, the statement of applicability saying, okay, I know what I need to have. I know why I don't have what I don't have, the controls that I don't have because they're not applicable, and you justify that. So this is what we do on stage 1, just to understand that we're on the right track. And stage 2 is getting deeper into sampling itself. We interview employees, we sample contracts, we sample employees' files. We're looking at the implementation of each and every control. This is a full system audit. a long one, I might say, a challenging and a hard one, a lot of breaks in between. But this is something that we're looking very thoroughly into how the organization is dealing with each and every risk and each and every control. Of course, we're looking at the internal audit. What are the processes used by the organization to monitor and to see if the system is effective? First of all, you need to look at yourself even better than what we do. And the management review, which means the management is there and is aware of the results and is aware of the weak spots and what needs to be done. And the corrective action process, which means that if you do identify any gaps, you have a system that will help you to correct them, and not just to do a correction that eliminates the problem, but to make a change in the process that will prevent it from happening again. When we have the whole picture and we have a sample, and the audit is a sample, we're not looking at 100% of your people or processes, we can recommend as an audit team to have or not to have the certification. And the committee, an independent committee that is doing the certification decision, is actually none of us auditors, it's just someone else. And what they look at is if we have enough evidence to support our decision or recommendation to grant or not to grant certification. I can tell you that there are, I think, very, very few cases where certification cannot be granted. There can be non-conformities that are fixed. But if the certification is recommended not to be granted, the auditors didn't do a good job during the document review in stage 1, because you were not supposed to get to stage 2 when you don't have a system.
Okay, thank you for that. So just as a recap, we have stage 1, then we have stage 2, and after stage 2, pending on the certification committee's decision, this is when you get the certificate. And I wanted, and I know we touched about that briefly. I think Yulia mentioned that the ISO 27001, like one of the misconceptions that I've been hearing a lot for the past few years, it was that it was an IT problem. And actually, I wanted to have to ask Hanan about that. So first of, I think first question is, do you agree with the notion that, it was considered, or is it still considered an IT problem? And then what will be your response to that?
No, I don't think it's an IT problem. I think at least for my case, cybersecurity would be the driver for that, or IT compliance would be the driver for that. But I don't think you can do that in a vacuum. I don't think it's just IT going through the process. It has to be a joint force with privacy and legal and HR and supply chain and procurement and other groups that are also part of it. Might not be as big of an audit for them, but it's still part of their process. We touched, and I think Noam talked about that a little bit, about the employee life cycle, sort of cradle to grave process. You cannot do that without having the HR processes in place. And when we're talking about third parties, how do you go and review the third party process without talking to procurement and the HR team and the legal team, making sure that we have those processes in place? When we look at our ISMS process touches everyone in the company, all the big players. So I think IT is the driver for some of that. Cybersecurity, definitely, IT compliance, but you have to partner when you do that, and you need to have the executive buy into the process. And having those two combined together helps you be successful in the process. And Yulia, I wanted to touch on something you said earlier, and I think it's really important to say that it's not about the certificate, it's about the growth. It's about the process. As I said earlier, we started really small with a few hundred people, with a few very small departments, and we grew it to the whole company exactly because of that reason. You need to mature the company, you need to put the company in a process, and working with your auditors, it's really important to go to that extent. And I think, you cannot do it just from an IT perspective. It won't get the same effect.
Exactly.
And I've been having a lot of talks with startup companies, and the questions they ask, is almost always the same. What do I need to do first? Do I need to do ISO 27001 first? Do I need to do SOC 2 first? What are your thoughts on that? Let's start with Noam.
So it turned out that we had to do both, more or less at the same time, and that's a decision we took. And I think it worked well for us. I think, instead of a 200% effort, it was a 150% effort. I mean, doing them both together. That's also a recommendation we got, from you, Ben. And it worked out well. ISO maybe covers more the procedural governance and some technical aspects, and SOC 2 is almost all around technical controls, but SOC wants to see that we have procedures. Okay, so if we have ISO, SOC it covers some of their requirements. Anyhow, for us, doing them both together worked out very well, and the effort was reasonable and justified it.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask another question. I have another question for Hanan. Did you get any do you have any recent discussions about privacy, I'm assuming? And that's my first question. And the second half of this question is, did you consider or did you employ using the ISO 27701 framework to deal with that?
Privacy is part of my day. We have to go through a lot of different privacy discussions. CCPA, GDPR, Israel privacy law, and India and China and everywhere else that we work in. We definitely have to protect our employee privacy and our customer privacy and our vendor privacy. It's part of my responsibility and my team's responsibility. We see ISO really related to that, and we also see the connection between that to other compliance. I think GDPR has made a huge change. I think in my roadmap, looking forward, compliance and privacy are going to be huge players in our roadmaps, and will help us set forward both how we develop product, how we support our vendors and our customers, and how we do joint development with both customers and vendors. So I don't have anything specific to say about 27701, but the general concept is always going to be there.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, if I'm understanding it correctly, and I think you alluded to that, you use the ISMS that you have as a baseline on which you can build out other frameworks and other like sets of controls, whether ISO, whether SOC 2, CMMC, NIST, or anything else you need to adhere with, you plug it into the ISMS. Is that a correct assumption on my part?
Yes. The ISMS process helps me make sure that my plan aligns with my risks and my risks align with my governance. And all three of them must align to have a successful program. I don't, the process that we go through for CMMC or for NIST, whatever version of NIST, or for ISO or SOC or GDPR or any one of the others, requires us to have one single program. And I really agree with what Noam just said. Having, two, 1 + 1 doesn't always equal 2. In this case, I completely agree. I think having 3 certificates doesn't mean that you need to triple the effort. Mm-hmm. It does mean that you need to triple the thought before you start the process. And it's more about the employee awareness and, the company awareness more than the actual effort that is required. ISMS, just goes throughout the different processes. It's not just for SOC or sorry.
Like I can also add to that. it's interesting. We found ourselves having other compliance requirements, like, you know, around privacy and ethics and anti-corruption. And they said, do you do a yearly training for anti-corruption and privacy? So we said, okay, let's put it into the procedure and add it to the yearly security awareness training. And now we're, you know, we're covering other topics as well. So, you know, it's in the procedure. We don't forget to do it. It's in the work plan, and it's part of the training. And we gained that as well with, you know, very little effort, because the process of doing things on time, documenting them, training, testing if needed is already there as part of the ISO.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And we started talking a bit about about privacy. So, and I see we only have 10 minutes left. So, Yulia, if you could just, in a nutshell, just provide you know, a bit of clarity around the ISO 27701, which is all around privacy. I know it's mapped neatly with GDPR. Maybe just give a few words around that, and then maybe we'll have one more topic around how to maintain the ISO 27001 properly.
Okay. So the 27701 is a relatively new standard, and the purpose of developing that was actually to have some kind of unification of Canada privacy and CCPA and GDPR and everything that various privacy legislations require. And the main difference between all that and this is that this is an accredited standard that is audited just like the ISMS that requires to have a management system, but not a different one, an integrated one. It's not a separate certification, it's just an add-on, an extension to scope, which helps the organization to have the certificate saying, okay, dear customers, I manage privacy. Not just having some kind of statement that I'm GDPR compliant. This is an accredited certification, just like the certification that the organization has for ISMS. And basically the whole purpose of all the organization doing that is for their clients to have the confidence that the information is safe and they comply with all those privacy laws, and they have a system to make it satisfactory and to make it effective. So 27701 is an extension to ISMS, and it enables organization to go through certification process for privacy requirements. And it's really aligned with the GDPR and to present some kind of evidence of having a system. And it's not this certificate, as Hanan said, it's the process of certification. And if you ask me, I think the report is much more valuable than the certificate, because when you have a detailed report of what was audited and how to work with the findings, it helps the organization to improve.
Okay, thank you for that. We have a question for Noam from Ronet. I think you saw that, and if you want to take that.
Sure. So hi, Ronen. You're asking, do you feel you grew a business since you obtained the ISO 27001?
I'm assuming it's US.
Yeah, US really an obstacle? So for us, for sure. I mean, I said it at the beginning, and that was the honest truth. We got mandated by potential customers to do it, to the extent that we told them, hey, you know, you can add in the agreement that we commit to do it by such and such, you know, 6 months from now, and you know, and we knew that we're going to have it by then, and that was we had to do it to sign an agreement. And since then, I believe all of our customers demanding it, new customers, renewals. Today, it's part of doing business. You can't avoid it, and I think it's good at the end.
Okay, and did you want to add something here, Tom?
Hi, everyone. So actually, I was thinking about getting some bit more, let's say, practical advice, both from Hanan at the enterprise level and Noam. I think we'll start maybe with Noam. How was the process of first time getting certificated and getting the standard? In how many man hours do you think you guys invested in it? And following that, what do you think? How is the day-to-day of maintaining this alignment for the standard?
So the process was selecting a consulting company, and because, I mean, I think we knew that we're doing things properly, but they were not aligned to any to ISO or to any other procedure. So we got the consultant, GRSee, and we worked with them first. They really understood what we're doing. They understood what customers are requiring from us, what the auditor will ask for, and so on. And this took a few months to they need to learn us, need to learn our challenges, our business, and we need to learn what we need to do, what we need to improve, and what do we need to just put into order in a certain way. Build procedures that will reflect what you're doing properly, and we'll also add some things that you're not doing in the right way. And so first you have to write the procedure, but then you also need to start doing them, okay? Because the auditor will want to see evidence, of course. So I think it took us about 6 months, I believe, to get audited the first time, and these days we're going through the second audit already. And
I think the 6 months we did, it was a combined project, you said, so it was both the ISO and the SOC 2. Okay.
Yeah, but they really ran parallel, and the effort was not double, as Hanan also said. And I think we put in like 200 hours into it from our time.
Okay.
Yeah, all together, I think. Maybe I'm optimistic. For sure, I'm not pessimistic here. So, yeah.
Okay, and thank you for that, Noam. And Hanan, how would you say the project looked at our enterprise level at a big organization?
I think the process was really similar. I think the biggest difference is we have our own compliance team, so we do the internal audit ourselves. We have our own set of auditors that work for us, and they manage our compliance program. I think it was more about realizing what the program is going to look like and which compliance frameworks we're going to choose and what's going to be the process. Getting the changes deployed, the processes deployed, I think took the longest. I think on and on, we're now on year 4 of our audit for both ISO and NIST-CSF and 800 and 171. So I think it's just going through the first year was the most challenging because you had to make a lot of changes to your day-to-day operations. But once it goes into the process and start streamlining, it's much easier. It doesn't take too long.
Thank you, Hanan, for that. I'm sorry that I'm jumping in, and I'm sure that we can continue and discuss this. And I know that there might be more questions coming from our audience, but time runs fast when we are having so much fun. And unfortunately, we are getting closer to the end of the hour. So I really want to go around before I thank you all for being here today and sharing your experience and your insights about ISO 27001. But maybe we can go around, and we'll start with you, Hanan. Any last tip or insight for those companies that are out there and now, sitting on the fence and trying to understand why should they have that ISO? What benefits will they have from your perspective as a corporate?
Getting through the process is more important than the certificate. The benefits outcome the undertaking, and it's not that bad once you started the process. It does require some work at the beginning, but the benefits are huge if you compare that to the work that you have to go through at the beginning.
Thank you. So this was from the giant corporate, the buyer perspective. Noam, from the other end, I'm sorry, don't undermine it, but from the startup perspective, how did it affect you, and what would you recommend for others?
So it's interesting. We exactly look at it from the other end. I mean, we're a small company, a startup, and And when we looked at it, what are all these processes have to do with us? These are for the big companies like Hanan, you know, it has nothing to do with us. It's a burden, it's daunting. Procedures, everybody's talking about procedures, and it's all about procedures, but at the end, it's not a big deal. I mean, if you do things the right way, or even if you do them half right, you're going to see it's not a big deal. And I don't think there is a single thing that we're required to do which is a waste of time. It really helps you be more secure, be able to conduct your business, work on a higher standard. I mean, it was daunting before we started, but now I don't see it this way. So.
Great insight. And before we move to Yulia, just another reminder for our audience, you still have time for last question while we ask Yulia for her insight. From your perspective, should there be, you know, Noam talked about the process and how many hours they put into that and how long that the entire process took. From your perspective, should there be one POC that manage all of this, or does it involve everyone in the company and they all have to be immersed in the process?
It is a management system. It is all hands on board. There are people who are managing, but there are others who are using the system, supporting the system, part of the system. It's not the CISO, it's not the IT. So when you go into this process, just realize that you're going to have to build a system that covers the whole organization. Invest your time. Don't look at it as a waste of money, because not having a system is much more risky. Find a good consultancy if you use a consultancy. Find a good certification body that works according to the accreditation requirement, because you cannot do the audit in one day and forget about it. And it's not a one-time process or project. It's a system that is being maintained and improved all the time.
Thank you, Yulia, for that. And I see that we don't have another question from our audience. So Ben, thank you so much for organizing and moderating the conversation today. Any last thoughts, tips, insights, recommendations from your end? And of course, thank you also to Tom that being here and assisting with this. Ben?
Well, I think my only takeaway from this would be, look, when you build up a company, whether it's a startup company or a larger company, you put all kinds of systems in place. You build processes around how you sell, how you deliver, how you operate. Information managing cybersecurity and compliance shouldn't be different. You need to have a system in place that will help you managing it. That's basically it.
Straight and simple. Thank you so much, Ben, and thank you so much to our speakers, Hanan, Yulia, and Noam, and Tom helping in the background. Thank you all for being with us today. As promised, this session was recorded and it will be available for you to watch again if you need to get some more information or even pass it to your friends. It will be available on our YouTube channel. There will be also an email sent out to you with our contact information and also for our speakers. So if you have follow-up questions, if you need more help with getting the certification, don't hesitate to contact all of us and we will be very happy to help you. Well, with that, as I said, it's the end of the hour. Thank you all and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon, for hosting. Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.